Hello and welcome to Code and Pixels. This is Kelly and Adekunle, and today we'll be chatting with Joey Banks about design and AI tooling.
So Joey is the founder of Baseline, which is a design system consultancy. Joey, thanks again for being part of the show. How's it going right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to join you both. It's going okay. A lot of good, a lot of overwhelmed, a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of exploration in it all. So I'm doing okay. I'm really glad to talk to you both and to finally be on the pod. And it's been really cool to see what you both have made.
Thank you, thank you. So, quick question: can you give a good description of your career overview from your first job to now being the founder of Baseline?
Yeah, so I started as a lifeguard. No, I won't take you back that far. I got my very first job my very first design job back in 2014. I was working at a small place in San Francisco called Scoot. It was like the electric scooters before the whole electric scooter thing really took off. I was the only designer on the team. It was my first kind of like design internship, and it turned into my first design job. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of overwhelm, but it was a lot of fun, especially in those days in San Francisco. I was very fortunate to be there. I'm very open about this, but in 2015, I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, totally out of the blue, first one in my family, kicking it off for generations to come. But that really changed my perspective on a lot, personally, but also professionally. And I ended up looking for a job within the space, or at least within the healthcare space. And I found a perfect opportunity at a company called Verta Health back in 2016. They're still around, and they were focused on those with type 2 diabetes. And it was such an impactful job for me as a designer. I joined when we were about 20 or so, and I got to learn all about this new disease that I had, even though it was a little bit different in type 1, but it was still very adjacent. And I got to work on something that felt really meaningful to me. And it was a place where I got to go from 20 or so people to a couple hundred. And that growth was really cool to experience. So I was there for a couple of years, and one of my favorite jobs just because of how close the mission was. It was actually during that job that I found this little tool called Figma, and I totally fell in love with it. We were in the beta program in the early days, and it was really clear to see how much this was going to change the industry at the time, especially coming from the days of syncing files through Dropbox. It was like, this feels a little bit better. So I was kind of that annoying kid at the time, probably knocking on Figma's door down the street to see if there was anything I could do or just to get to know the team a little bit. And I had a friend there, and eventually that kind of turned into one of my very first consulting roles was actually doing voiceovers for their early videos on YouTube. So if you've ever watched those back in the day, it was always like, "Hello and welcome to another Figma tutorial." That was me, and it was a lot of fun to do. Got to learn all about the tool, obviously, and got to really go deep in it. But I think there really discovered like my love of teaching things that felt difficult. Especially in the space of design. So that role turned into a full-time job over at Figma. I was a designer advocate for a couple of years, teaching Figma, talking to teams, getting to know especially the design systems industry at large. And after Figma, I realized I wanted to take what I was learning and put it into practice. And so I joined Twitter. Absolute dream job, especially in the early day or in 2019 or so. Getting to I remember opening up Figma and seeing the tweet button. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the button, represented in Figma. It was such a special feeling. Like many designers, I found my love of design on Twitter from following those who were in the craft early in the 2010s. And it was felt really special to be on that team there. Obviously, a lot of history happened at the company. And as a result, I departed and I found myself at Webflow for a bit, working on design systems there. Was there for a couple of years, but in the back of my mind, I had always wanted to go independent in some way. I really throughout my career, like I was always working on the side on something, like many of us, but it was always the off hours that felt so important. And so in 23, I finally made the leap to go independent and go full time with my company Baseline.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's I'm wondering, you talked about going independent. Like, what does the day to day for you look
Yeah.
like? Because I'm assuming like you're not only on Figma no more. It's
No.
clients and contracts and all that stuff.
Yeah, going independent was a big decision. It was a scary decision. There's a million reasons not to, especially with the healthcare considerations and the market and the industry. But it has been the most rewarding thing I believe I've ever done in my career, specifically because day to day I get to work on things that are certainly around design and design systems, But I also get to learn so much about things that are outside of design, working with clients and customers and working within legal and marketing and admin. And before going independent, I was always confused, like all these people spending so much time on email. Like I just don't get it. Cause when I worked at a big company, I got like 2 emails a day, right? And I was like, this is easy. But when you go independent, gosh, you're in your inbox so much and it's a good thing, but it totally just changed where my focus was. So I've learned a lot. And the early days, transparently, I was working 6 days a week, at least 10, 11 hours a day, just trying to make this thing work. And I was doing the admin side and the business side and the finance and legal and all of that, plus the design production work. And it was hard, but I didn't mind it because it was like building my own thing for the first time. And these days, a lot's changed, but the day to day, I find myself spending time on a couple core things, which is one, managing the team and making sure that this feels like the best agency to join and the best place to work at. We have 5 people now, 6 including our dog, but we'll say 5. And it is really important to me that this feels like a place where people can, I know it's a little cliche, but when you're in the spot of running the team, like it really does feel so important, which is I want this place to feel safe and like a place where you can do your best work and also a place where we can learn and kind of grow together. I feel like I'm working with people that are far smarter than me and far better at things that I would never be good at. And I think the best thing I can do at the moment is give them the space to run and do their thing. And that's been a real learning for this year.
I would say I'm kind of in the same boat, but it's the case where it's like you have to let go of certain things. And
Yeah.
sometimes you're not going to be designing, you're going to be reading emails and talking to people. But I like the idea where you're just kind of trying to make it the best place for people to thrive and whatnot. So,
Especially in the agency world, there's it can be tough, right? And if anyone's ever been in an agency, it's a lot different than being in a, kind of in-house, so to speak. So trying to create a place that feels quite a bit better for anyone to join, as we grow the team is really important. But you're right, like letting go is hard, especially when it's your thing. Baseline started really in 2021, and I was doing finance for the first 3-4 years, and it was surprising. It sounds silly to say, but I actually really enjoyed learning about small business tax and forming the business and business structures and payroll and all of that. It was a lot to learn, but it was interesting because it's all kind of in this world of systems, right? It's just a different system. And it got to a point where I was feeling really confident and good about it, but I also recognized that I probably needed to hand this off. Like, this is not where my time is well spent. And also, I'm not, as good as I was feeling. And it's probably obvious that I wasn't the best at it, but it's hard to hand something off, especially when you're growing and when the success depends on that thing going well and continuing to be okay. Sometimes it works well and you're like, gosh, I'm so glad I handed this off. And sometimes you're like, oh, maybe I should have taken that on, or maybe it wasn't the right fit. But I think the biggest lesson that I've ever had in going independent was I cannot be the ceiling, and getting myself out of any spot where it's like I feel like I'm kind of the blocker, I think is really important these days.
that should definitely be on the t-shirt.
I am not the ceiling. Yeah, it's definitely a feeling over here for sure. But it gets easier. As soon as you start to let go of things, you're like, wow, what else can I let go of? Or what else can I hand off? Like, and seeing people, on the team or even those that you kind of hire, in terms of accountants or CPAs, like seeing them do their thing and knowing how much easier it probably is for them, but also seeing them kind of practice their expertise, right? It's just as special as doing it yourself, I think. Even more special because you get to hand it off to someone and you're probably in better hands. So yeah, it's tough at first, but also it allows like time back to do the things that are most important, which is focusing on the team and trying to grow the business.
Love that. I know you recently had a LinkedIn post a couple weeks back, basically saying that if you're worrying about AI, you're not early. You're early, not behind. What does that actually mean when you say like for designers in practice?
Yeah, I think that post probably came out of some of my own anxiety, if I'm being honest. Every day I wake up and I see something new, or I feel like I just got a handle on something, and then the tool changes, and I'm constantly feeling behind, right? I'm constantly feeling like there's something else to learn, or I'm falling behind the industry, or gosh, it's just moving so fast I can't keep up, and it's this state of overwhelm. And so by writing that post, I think I was trying to focus on my own anxiety, but I was also trying to focus in on For context, I wrote this post on LinkedIn just a couple days after Claude Design launched, which is an incredible tool, but I think it launched on a Friday, and I think we all in the industry spent the weekend nervously pacing and focusing on the future of our careers. If you're me, I know I did, but I think it was really just trying to reassure myself and those close to me that even just by thinking about these tools and being a little anxious or being in it or even being cognizant of what are the new things that are launching or how are they affecting our industry, I think you're ahead. There was that stat a couple months ago which really made an impact on all of us, I think, which was like 84% of people have never even tried AI, right? And to be part of the group that's seen the new tools and seen things launch and seen the change, like I don't know what percent, of course, but like that really does feel like it puts you kind of in the top of those who are trying to stay on these things, right? And so I think sometimes by feeling the overwhelm or by feeling the anxiety, it's actually you're feeling that because you're maybe further ahead than you realize. That was at least how I was trying to look at that.
Yeah, I was kind of feeling that way. Then I came to realization because you know, you go on LinkedIn, everyone's talking about AI and they're like, oh yeah, I'm an AI expert, or they call it like
Totally.
AI engineers and whatnot. And I was like, that wasn't a thing like 5 years ago, but okay, we're gonna go with that. And then realizing it's like a lot of noise. And I think
Yep.
that's when you kind of have to like take a step back because this tools come in and out, and I'm like, there's no way you can master a tool within a couple of months. And then once you master it, there's another tool, and then there's another feature, and you're like, wait, I'm not even building features no more. I'm actually just like learning how to use a tool, which is also kind of weird.
Right.
But that was one of the things that kind of frustrate me because, especially working within a company, you're kind of being told to like, hey, try out this tool or use this tool, and then you're like, I'm not sure what's the whole purpose of it, um, but yeah, just kind of thinking in sense of like I'm feeling overwhelmed, but also like it's kind of interesting that a lot of people are not using the tool, or well, based on the research. So, uh,
I think there's like some quote out there, some uh, phrase or way of saying, which is like anxiety is almost like the mismatch between expectations and reality. And I think a lot of this is probably true in the world of these tools where you see the promise that's there and you're like, oh my gosh, we've got to switch to this and everyone needs to use it, right? And then, for us designers, we go in and use it, and we're like, I don't know about this. This feels far off from the promise, or maybe it is closer to the promise than other tools, but it's not quite there. I don't know if this is the best use at the moment. And that pressure that can often be felt of we've got to use this or this is the new way versus the reality, and also trying to balance like the work itself. I think that creates a lot of, like you said, noise, right? And a lot of fear and a lot of like, wait, am I wrong here? Am I misinterpreting the purpose of these tools? So I think there's a lot of anxiety even in that itself.
yeah, and you mentioned Claude Design. I'm wondering, how do you know when something's worth adopting versus ignoring? Because I feel like with the bigger companies, it's hard to ignore them, like ignore new things and whatnot. And you see all the press release and Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm wondering, do you have a certain approach where you try them out and then you see if it's worth it, or wondering?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'll be honest, for the first year or so of this whole AI revolution or whatever, it kind of is, like, I think I ignored a lot of the things. I think I kind of had my feet in the ground, and I didn't want to move past the work. Like, I'm kind of, the reason I loved Figma and design so much was the love of the game almost. Like I love like the blank canvas. I love putting music on and getting in there and like trying to design something from nothing, and trying to see, like, for me, one of the most fun things about the design process is when you start somewhere and it doesn't quite feel right and you keep working and working, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I think I have a solution, or I think this is it. And then you kind of get that moment of like joy from trying that and seeing it work or seeing that feel right. And so with a lot of the prompt to design impact that took over, to me, that didn't feel that fun. It was like, I don't want to let go of the blank canvas, admittedly. I think there's something so special in the kind of messy middle, so to speak. That said, though, I think realized that, like most are maybe realizing, or like we're all experiencing, I don't think these tools are going away. And I don't think these shifts in workflows are going away. Everyone's vibe designing and vibe coding, right? Like I hadn't really jumped into that, if I'm being honest. I mean, I got the concept and I was seeing projects from it, but I never really sat down and been like, okay, I'm going to build something today. I'm going to use Cursor. I'm going to prompt my way to it until actually yesterday. Maybe I can just build like a to-do list app, right? You know, the classic like hello world. And it was interesting. In total, it took me about 102 prompts to get to where I wanted it to be. But it was interesting because I didn't really know what the design was going to look like. I knew the functionality. I knew I wanted it to sync. I wanted it to be local here on my computer, but also able to access it on my phone as well through our network. I knew that I wanted to be able to delegate things or push them off to tomorrow, or delete them or add notes. You know, all the things that a to-do list app could do. And what I the joy that I experienced was prompting your way and seeing something usable and workable right away, right? I mean, that's pretty cool. Being able to like type a to do, tap enter, and be like, oh wait, when I tap escape, it doesn't back out of it. It saves it. Like, oh, I don't want that, so I'm going to go and prompt, and fix that. Like that moment was pretty fun because it's instant feedback, and you kind of work your way towards something that feels better. But also on the other side, like I I just wrote a bunch of text and it took 102 prompts. And what it really looked like was I was in Cursor. I would be like, oh, we need to do this. So why don't we change it to this? Or let's have the escape key do that. I would tap enter and then I would go check Slack or check my email or like sit and wait for it to finish. Right. And it was like in those moments that felt really weird and difficult because we talk all the time about getting closer to the code and closer to the closer to the output or closer to the prototype. But in those moments, I actually felt further away from it than ever before, I think, because I have no idea what the code is doing. How many times have you designed something in Figma or another tool, and then you're like, you know what, I'm going to take this in a totally different direction. Let's go over here, and you get to a spot that like you never imagined getting to, but turns out like that's the one that feels right. I don't think I did that yesterday, and I don't think I would have done that because I was so deep in the prompting process, and I had so much code written, and I had used so much of my allowance that it would have felt backwards to like undo all of that, right? So that was a really interesting moment. Now I'm curious, like, have you both experienced that before?
I feel like we're talking about potential and exploration. And I find the most interesting thing is before it seemed like we needed to have a very strong definition of done. There was a lot of upfront work getting things very solidified because we don't want to waste time. We want to have upfront success metrics and we want very a very finite user experience almost. We want to maybe cover all the edge cases. And now I almost feel like it's the reverse. It's just kind of start out with one experience and you kind of tweak it a little bit and it evolves a little bit. And it's just a very interesting way of approaching product delivery because suddenly what's the role of a product manager now? What's the role of UX research and things that used to be a very clear delivery pipeline now just has it seems to have exploded with all these new tools.
Yeah, I agree because most of my background is doing prototyping. So I've done anything from paper prototyping to wireframe prototyping, all that stuff. So I'm very used to taking in design and iterating over it. But I do think there's a cost because when AI is running through like multiple iterations, you lose that story. So I could look at past work where I was like, all right, this prototype failed because we tested with this per user and they said this is weird or this is awkward, whatnot. So basically, you lose all of that. And like Kelly mentioned, also you have a case where it's like you might have a PM that's just kind of like vibe code their way through a lot of the stuff, but they might be missing a lot of context around like the user and like the business and design best practices and whatnot. And obviously, like you can kind of make sure that whatever like Cursor or Claw that's it's using like the design system, but at the end of the day, I think there's a price with like the amount of prototypes and losing that story. And I feel like the cheaper it is, the more often you're going to do it, and then you kind of like get this like decision fatigue because now you have like 100 different directions, but you don't know where to go. And I think that's kind of like how I see it. And I think, usually if you have a good design process and you're disciplined, you're able to kind of escape that. But I feel like with more people coming out from that are not like product designers or engineers, I see this a lot where they just kind of like don't know what direction to kind of take.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And on one hand, it's overall, I think it's kind of an amazing thing, right? Like it reminds me a lot of the days that Figma launched, which allowed people who weren't designers to finally get into the design process. I remember back to Verta Health, like one very special moment for me in my career, and why one reason why I fell in love with design systems was we had a couple of physicians on the team who had only been able to use software that was given to them. They had no input, they had no say in how it felt or looked or worked. And when they were in Figma with me and they were dragging buttons in, and they were like making their own thing. And it was rough, but they were in the process and they were like, what if this was here? And what if that were there? And like, I don't really need that. Right. And I think in the same way that that was a special moment back then, like this is a special moment now where anyone, it's a common phrase, right? But it's like anyone can get in and can design and can make something. And I think that's awesome. Even for me, kind of creating that to do app, like I never would have been able to make something functional like that. I could have written maybe the CSS for it, maybe, but like no way could I have hooked up like a database for it and allowed it to work and provided the animations that were in there. Like that's super cool. And it's a really good feeling. It's just a different way of working, and I think there is almost a bit of, for me at least, like there is almost a little bit of mourning in the old way of working. I don't think it's totally gone. I think it's just maybe used at a different time in the process. And the challenge that I feel is that because it is so easy to iterate and to put something out there and to get immediate feedback on it, right? You can just keep doing that. And I think it's dangerous to maybe use that as an excuse to bypass research or the typical process of interviewing, right? And that's a hard thing to speak about. It's a hard thing to advocate for, because the promise, as we talked about earlier, is so large, right? So I think maybe in the anxiety of like trying these new tools or feeling behind, like there's also that feeling, which is like we're all designers because I think we love designing. We love like seeing the process of kind of s- seeing something come to life from nothing.
I love that you bring up efficiency and speed, and you used 102 prompts for for
Yes.
the app. And my question was, how do you kind of balance the number of prompts and token usage? Because that can get a little pricey. So do you have any tips and tricks or ways to deal with that constraint?
Yeah. I've always been someone when using any of these tools, for better or worse, I write as if I'm texting a friend. And I don't sit there. Even when I'm using traditional LM to get some feedback on something or to iterate through something, like I don't sit there and write a big long prompt and I don't describe all the use cases and I don't describe in that single prompt like exactly what I want to see for the output. I kind of just maybe it's back to the point of like the messy middle a little bit. Like I kind of just start with like something that's a little bit vague, and then it's kind of like connecting the dots, but you don't really know where the dots are leading a little bit. And so the reason I do that personally is I don't know, I just think that's more fun. Like to your point earlier, of prototyping and seeing what works or what doesn't. That's interesting. And some like there were things that had been created through this that I don't know if I ever would have expected to do, like a container around small things, but like a container around an icon or a hover interaction that I hadn't put there. So on the point of efficiency, like, oh my gosh, yeah, I probably could have knocked this out on like three prompts had I really sat there and wrote everything and thought through it, right? But again, I think the reason that I chose not to do that and will probably choose not to do that going forward as much as I can is I don't want to have an end solution in mind because I don't know if that end solution is the right one, right? And if you kind of one shot it, I think it's cool because you get there in a really efficient way. But like, what else am I doing with my time? Like when it was working, I was just checking Slack and email. Like I'm not hurting for time over here. I would rather explore the directions. And again, I know it's a really simple example of like kind of vibe designing or vibe coding like a to-do list app, right? But I think it's true in a lot of areas as we use these tools where it does pay to be more efficient and it does pay to have like a solution in mind. But I think there's also something so um, important in the wandering around solutions and trying to get somewhere. So yeah, Kelly, I think I was probably very inefficient how I spoke to Cursor yesterday.
I bring it up because I hear about, oh, free token weekend and companies doing things like that, and it's funny to see when those opportunities come up, the servers are slammed because everyone is trying to get their free tokens.
Yeah, and I you know, it's a tough balance, right? This stuff is expensive, and we're starting to see the cost really rise up, and it is a challenge to sit there and think, well, how much do I know about this solution? How much can I even describe at the moment? And I've even noticed in some of the tutorials that I've seen out there, even from Figma, there's a lot of prompt first and then kind of design or iterate a little bit second, which is to me wild coming from Figma, the open canvas tool where you did kind of design first and then push it forward second. So I think that the order is even changing a little bit of like how we design something or iterate or push forward on something, which is all to say it is expensive from the start. And I think that is a real challenge in some of these workflows.
I did this yesterday where I prompted a design and it didn't look good. And then I was like trying to make the changes, and it kind of felt like, it's like like you're trying to fix someone else's design, and they're just like, wait a minute, like I want to change all this stuff, and then I was like, I could prompt it, or I could just do the change myself. And I was like,
Right.
wait a minute, I could have just start from scratch if that was the case. But I think that was kind of the idea where I was like, yeah, this doesn't really make sense for me. But I'm wondering if
Right.
like if anyone else felt like that too, or it kind of feels a little bit yucky. So
Every single day. Like it reminds me of ceramics class in high school where I just felt like the entire class was me trying to fix my like horrible looking thing, right? It never quite looked good. I was just spending so much time trying to fix the thing that I had actually kind of broken, you know? And it probably would have been easier to maybe start with something that was good or to have someone else probably just do it. But I think there is, something to consider is some of the recent videos and language that I've seen is like, oh, okay, well, I want to explore a different direction where maybe like the date picker is up at the top, not the bottom, right? So I'm just going to prompt and do that. And it's like, well, sure. But also, did you need to do that? And like, did that actually use more time, more energy, more tokens, more expense than just doing it? And by it's something as simple as moving something from the bottom to the top, like would you have actually explored something different than maybe you hadn't had you just sent that simple request, right? Like how many times on the canvas have we moved something around and been like, oh, what if we actually put that in a drop down, or like what if we actually made that smaller, all the little decisions that we make as designers. So I think what's tough about this moment is part of me feels like old man yelling at the literal cloud, of compute and these tools. But I think it's important to kind of recognize in your own way of working, like what is the balance between using these tools, trying them without expectation, but also not forgetting like your own skill in the work and not forgetting like what makes you you as a designer. And by the challenge of like not offloading too much of your own intuition to something else, I think is hard, especially when there's pressure to use those tools.
Your example of moving the date picker is so spot on because sometimes I start typing something and I go, wait, what am I doing with my life? Why can't I just do that myself? And especially when it comes to, let's say, you're doing a new major release. I know traditionally I've shipped like a code mod or some helper scripts, just make that transition easier. And now it's like, well, do we do that or do we introduce a skill? And I was thinking about the trade offs because I know as an engineer, I know the breaking changes, and I can ask AI what the breaking changes are to be more confident. It was an interesting thought exercise on what does the future look like? Like, are we going to just ask AI to do everything for us?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's the same problem or the same thought almost over and over again, right? Where, okay, sure, I could write this email. I know I could do it, but I'm just going to ask AI to help me real quick, right? And there's even I don't know if I'll be able to point to them exactly, but I know there have been studies recently where it's like, actually, there is a bit of cognitive decline when you stop doing something and you offload it and then you try to come back to it. And so to me and to the younger designers and early career designers we're working with, I feel that a lot and I hear that a lot. And I sense that in myself where it's like, what is the correct way of doing it? And if I'm doing it manually, like, is that wrong or should I be? And that is like, I think a very real load to pay attention to because everything feels possible. It's like you almost feel like you have to do everything, right? And you're not really sure when to stop or what not to do. And so I think it's important that we all kind of let ourselves sit with things a little longer, or to feel that it's okay to learn at our own pace, to like step away from the feeling that um, you should constantly be making, building, or figuring something out just because the tools suddenly make it possible. I think there's a real moment there of reflection that will always be important. And I'm sure a lot of what we're saying here, like it's the classic conversation, right? But I'm sure this could have been applied to tools in the past and workflows of the past and technologies of the past, right? But I think it's our first time kind of really going through this, and I think the anxiety makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I just recently went through it when I was trying to build something and I was trying to some sort of function and I forgot like how to do it. And I was like, wait a minute. And it kind of reminds me of like if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right.
So I've kind of came up with this framework where it's like if I don't really care about it or I just want to do it very fast, like emails or that like I use AI for that. But if I want to learn it, AI is going to be like more of like my tutor, so to speak.
Right.
So that's my recommendation for anyone like getting into the industry because I was like, if AI was around when I was trying to learn stuff, I feel like everyone would be a different designer, and also like the process of like going through magazines and getting like inspiration and all this other stuff. Like I think that's like part of the process, which I think sometimes you miss that process and storytelling because obviously that's the kind of idea when you're trying to sell design. It's like, hey, how do you get from this one to this one? And it's like, oh, I went through like got this inspiration. I went to Japan, or you kind of be able to kind of take anything from your past and kind of put it into that design itself. So, but yeah, that's like what I recommend for newer folks because it's definitely hard these days. So
If I had AI in high school, oh my gosh, like book reports would have been a lot easier. That's for sure. But I think that's spot on. And certainly something a lot of us are feeling like there's. I mean, I remember back in design school, like yeah, like the very real feeling of like sitting there with a bunch of magazines and flipping through them and like seeing things that were not relevant at all, but you found a little bit of inspiration in, right? And again, that's kind of that big messy middle there. That's important.
for sure. Yeah, just to kind of close out this episode, like, do you have anything you want to plug or shout out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one thing that I've been thinking a lot over here about is I think in the same way that learning Figma 10 years ago felt really challenging for a lot of people, including myself. I think this new era feels challenging in the same way. And something I've always enjoyed personally is trying to help designers of any shape and form like feel more comfortable with the workflows of today. I've been teaching Level Up with Figma for about 3 years now, and I've been teaching Figma for gosh, about 7 or 8 or 9 years now. It's been a long time. And so, what we're trying to do over here at Baseline is not only providing a lot of design systems consulting to help companies, continue to use these tools with success and build up their systems and patterns to work well with these tools, but also to help them grow and scale their products. But we're also trying to provide a lot of education in the same workflows and to help designers and to help leadership even feel more comfortable with these tools and their capabilities. So we're really enjoying that. And for me, it's been a lot of fun to teach something that feels scary and feels new, just like I think Figma felt scary and new about a decade or so ago. So if I can ever help anyone out there, please reach out. It's been so fun and rewarding to run Baseline and to have incredible clients, and we're very excited for the future. And it feels fun to run a team now and to be getting into all the new and scary stuff. But yeah, just the thing that has been most rewarding in my career is just teaching and trying to do more of that, and having yet another excuse to get back into it and to, I hope, help people feel more comfortable with this new era is again really rewarding.
Love that. Well, thank you again, Joy, for today's conversation. We really enjoyed it. And yeah, hopefully you have a good day.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It was so good to chat with you both. Good to get some of the worries and anxieties out on the open, maybe. So thanks for having me on.
We want to thank you for tuning into this episode. For more content, feel free to explore our previous episodes on codeandpixels.fm. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media at Code and Pixels FM. Y'all have a great day.